All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD 1000 Web Development Technologies course, I've been creating a series of video presentations that are based off of the PowerPoint slides for one of the books that we're using for the class, that book being Murach's JavaScript and jQuery 4th edition. And believe it or not, I've come to the end except for Chapter 18. Which is how to work with AJAX. I did the last section out of order. I did 17, then 19, and now I'm doing 18. So, how to work with AJAX, and let's just get right to it. As always, we start with our objectives, our applied objectives, as shown here, and our knowledge objectives, as shown here, and also shown on the next slide. This is more advanced stuff that, yes, we hope to at least be able to introduce you to in the AWD 1000 Web Development Technologies class, but that we spend a lot more time on in the AWD 1111 Database-Driven Websites class. Okay? All right. So first thing they talk about in here, you can see Google's auto-suggest is an AJAX application. Now, I'm going to give you my take on this stuff, which won't always be the same as what's in the book. But with auto-suggest and really with AJAX, first let's talk about AJAX. AJAX is an acronym, sort of. And what I mean is, for years it has stood for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. All right? And it gives you the opportunity to basically, for lack of better words, do like a partial page refresh. All right. And you'll notice, with Google Suggest here, what they mentioned, and notice, let's just use their example. All right. And I'm going to cut the size here down quite a bit. So I'll put it over here. All right. And I'll open up a new tab. And I'm going to do just what they did, but I'm going to do it a little bit differently. So I'm going to put in here HTML. And you notice it's not showing the same stuff that it shows there. But as soon as I put and, now one of the things that's in there is HTML and CSS. All right, and now when I put in CSS, all right, you can see it's not exactly the same, all right, but it's very similar now to what you saw earlier. So the point is this: what we are allowed to be doing in here is, as we update the page, as we've been doing, or as we update what we're putting in here, what comes in down here updates. Now, this is what's referred to as a partial page refresh, because this stuff down here isn't updating. All right. What's updating is just the area that's in here that shows the results of what we're searching for. So how does all that happen? Well, what they show you here is something that, believe it or not, we looked at real early in the book. And as it says there, that's how a normal HTTP request is processed. Now, with that, we're talking about something that's being processed and being put out that has got some JavaScript on the front end and or on the back end, because this isn't a simple static HTML request where it would be just handled by the web server. So if it was just a simple static request, it would be just the stuff you see in here. But since there's more to it, we have to add the application server and we have to add the database server. And again, as always, you can see that with all these things, that basically the arrows are going in both directions. All right. So the difference between how an AJAX request is processed versus an HTTP request is all in the little bubble here. HTTP request, HTTP response, new page, AJAX request, AJAX response, just the data that has to change. Now, I used to give an example of how to use this, but it's changed over the years, and in my opinion, at least, not for the better. I used to go out to family video. All right. I have no, affinity for family video, but it was just kind of neat what they had here. All right. And what used to happen here was when you took your mouse on here and you put it here. Now notice it's getting this little box effect But notice when I click here, see that how we got a little bit more, all right, and a little bit less, etc. Well, let's look at this one. So let's look here. No, that's not what I want. There we go. This is a good example. So this shadow in the cloud, all right? What's happening right here when we put our mouse over it? We're getting this box effect, right? All right. But the big news, the big thing that's changing is they only have a certain amount of room here. So they're only showing a certain amount in here. And it says, in the throes of World War II, Captain Maud Garrett, Chloe Grace Moretz joins the all-male crew of a B-17 bomber with, and if you wanted more, notice what happens. Now, why am I saying that this is basically AJAX? This didn't change. Everything up to right here where it says bomber with a top, that remained the same. All right. What changed when we clicked the read more was this stuff that you see right here got added. And where previously it said read more, it now says read less. All right. So we got a partial page refresh. The only thing that refreshed on the page was what we needed to refresh. In this case, what was part of this particular movie. Now, hopefully that helped rather than hurt as far as giving you a little bit, but that was the data only. All right. So terms related to AJAX. I mentioned before that AJAX has always been known as an acronym for asynchronous JavaScript and XML, and it still is. But that said, much of the work that's done today, probably more, is done using JSON, JavaScript object notation, as opposed to XML, the extensible markup language. All right. The whole thing, though, is based on this object called the XML HTTP request, or XHR object, that was something basically kind of developed probably around 20 years ago by Microsoft. All right, we'll talk Fetch API in a little bit. We'll talk web service in a little bit. We've already talked in here in this course, we have talked about APIs, or application program interface. And basically the API, for lack of better words, is what makes something go. All right. It's the features and the functionality that is provided so that the users can use some kind of a service. That's my definition. Now, I'm not going to look it up, but if I went out to Wikipedia, they're going to have a little bit different definition, for example. So I've already mentioned this, these two common formats. XML isn't used as much today, as much, I believe at least, as JSON is. Now, XML was actually created, let's see, I'm fine. XML was actually created, I'd have to look it up. But if you told me a good 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I'd believe it. What had happened at that time was what we'd heard, what was being said was HTML, the hypertext markup language, is dead. We need something to replace it. We need something that's more extensible. Hence the X in XML for extensible markup language. One of the main differences between XML and HTML is with XML, you make your own tags. So we've got here a beginning management tag and an ending management tag. That's our root. And inside of each, there's team members. Each team member has a name, has a title, has a bio. All right. This is the XML header up here. And XML, notice it still says version equals 1.0. Well, geez, how many versions have they had? To my knowledge, one. All right. And where this sometimes fell apart, so to speak, metaphorically speaking here, is with things like this. Wow, isn't there already an HTML tag called title? Yes, there is. All right. But there ended up being different variants of XML, hundreds of them. There was a math XML for mathematicians, a chem XML, CHEM, for chemists, a music XML for musicians, etc. All right. And sometimes there were overlaps, such as, what if you wanted what if there was one for carpenters? And I don't know if there is or not. But a carpenter wanted to talk about a table. All right. With that table, would you be able to mix any HTML in there? And if you did, would the table the carpenter was talking about be an HTML table or a table with 3 or 4 legs? All right. So there's possible conflicts in names. Now, JSON is more often than not is preferred today for different reasons. And one reason that it's preferred today is that its syntax and the way it looks is much more similar to JavaScript and JavaScript objects. The main difference is with JavaScript objects, just like this, so this is an object. How do I know? It's inside of curly braces. It's a JSON object. And that object is made up of an array of objects. How do I know that? Because of the bracket here and the bracket here. So notice before we still had name, title, and bio. And we've got name, title, and bio. These are the keys. These are the values of the keys. And unlike JavaScript objects, where the keys do not have to be in double quotes, but the values do unless they're numbers, here both the keys and the values must be in double quotes. All right? So now this JSON placeholder service is kind of neat. As it says, it's got fake data that's available to you. Let's go out and take a quick look. So we'll use the one that we had here. So we'll just say JSON placeholder .typi code.com. All right. Free fake API for testing and prototyping. So if I wanted to in here, okay, I could go in and I could add hundreds of names, etc. Whatever I wanted to put in here. So it's something we'll take a look at, not right now, but at a later time. All right, and they show in here some of the fake data, as they say, that's available. I'm not going to read to you, so you can take a look at that yourselves if you're interested. The to-do one might be really neat, though, to take a look at later. All right, so there's a URL that returns data. The data will be users. Some of the data that's returned, and they show you examples. Each user has an ID, a name, a username, an email, and potentially more information. All right, so let's jump into talking about this XHR object, which is the stripped down name, so to speak, for the XML HTTP request object. You'll notice that the object has different methods. All right, you can open the object, you can send data. It's got a response type, a response state, and a status. And it can respond to an onReady state change and an onError. So here's an example. So what are we doing right here? We are creating a brand new one of these objects, and quite often that's the name you'll use, especially if there's only one of them. And we're saying that what's going to be returned is JSON. All right, and here we're using an arrow function. And we're saying if the ready state is 4, meaning, okay, that I believe everything is copacetic, it's all cool, and the status is 200, then log out the response. On error, you're going to log the error message. And then you'll notice in here, we do an open, It's a get to just display some information. So it's displaying the different users to us. As it says here, terms related to this, member of an object, callback function. Well, it says here one method of the fetch API. The only way that we will understand fetch is to actually do some work with fetch. All right. And you may or may not remember, but we actually did do a fetch assignment in the AWD 1000 class. All right. In the fall semester. And we'll go back and probably take a look at it again. And I'll do a similar one, if not the same one, in this fall's AWD 1000 class. But as it says, what fetch does is it makes an asynchronous GET request. Now, imagine this, because a lot of people get confused with words like asynchronous. Okay? Let's imagine that I'm a parent, and I am one, but my kids are grown and they've moved out of the house. Okay? But let's suppose it's years ago and my kids were all still home, and they happen to be, I know they're down the street and they're playing. All right. I don't see them, but I can hear a lot of playing going on down the street. So my girls' names are Taylor, Mackenzie, and Chloe. So I go, Taylor, Mackenzie, Chloe, come home for supper. Now, if I cannot do anything else, in other words, if I have to just stand there until they come home, that's what's referred to as a synchronous, not asynchronous, but that is directly would be referred to as a synchronous operation. Again, not asynchronous, but synchronous. What that means is I would be prohibited from doing anything until they come back. Well, let's imagine that they're in the middle of a real, whatever they're doing, they're playing hide and seek or whatever, and they can't hear me, or they're like, yeah, we'll be back soon. We'll tell them we'll be back in 10 minutes. Well, probably I don't want to just stand there for 10 minutes looking kind of foolish, waiting for them. I want to go on and do something else. So I might just give a yell and go, Taylor, Mackenzie, Chloe, you've got 5 minutes to get home. That's when dinner is being served. So for instance, it's kind of like I'm putting a timer on them. They've got 5 minutes, and in the meantime, now I can go back in the house. Maybe I'm making dinner. All right, that's asynchronous. When I ask to perform an operation, but since the operation may take a period of time, all right, I put in an asynchronous request, and while we're waiting for that to happen, I can go on and do something else. Now you'll notice here, it says it returns a promise object. We'll talk promises. All right. And typically a promise is in one of three modes. I've talked about this in other lectures, but either the promise has been accepted, the promise has been rejected, or the promise is not really been acted on yet. And again, you're going to know what this is better as we go on. Promises have what's called a then that you can put in there, which is kind of neat because you can chain together a bunch of different things that you want to have happen. It also has a catch. And why would the catch matter? Because if the promise is going to be rejected, you would be able to say what you wanted to have happen next. All right. As it says here, one method of the response object is JSON. Notice, as they mentioned, JSON returns a promise object that eventually resolves to a JavaScript object created from JSON. All right. This will not make a lot of sense until we start to really look at this in action. So notice here, what we're saying is do this fetch. All right. Once this has been done and we have found this, then do this and then do this. And if at any of the time during here, if this fails, or this fails, or this fails, then do this. And like I said, hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. So they've got an example here, this astronomy picture of the day application. And I believe, I don't have my book with me right now, but I believe what that is you put in a date, you click view, and it goes through its series of pictures. And for that date, it shows you a picture and a little bit of a demo as far as what's going on with that picture. All right, so there's the HTML for it, not very complex really. The associated CSS. All right, and what they're doing is they're using an API. So in other words, they are telling you, the system, to go out to here and find for us, go out to there and find for us that picture. Now, typically to do this, you need to register at the website. And the reason for that you need to typically register is you're going to get permission to do certain things. And they want to make sure that if you try to do something you shouldn't do, or either try to remove or add or modify something you shouldn't, they know who you are. So you register and you get an API key. So in here you have to provide, so this is going out to the site right there, and this is saying the key is demo, so that could be anything. Typically it's about, I don't know, up to 20 characters, letters and numbers, and then you put in the date. You wouldn't put demo key in here. You'd register, you'd actually be given a key. All right, so let's quickly go through this. So use strict, as it says, returns as date string. All right, and there we're displaying the picture. Notice if there's an error, we're going to print that out. Otherwise, as it says, if there's some kind of a problem with the data, it'll display a different message. Otherwise, if we get in here, the idea is it's going to show us the picture. Now I'm at 22 minutes, so I'm going to continue on in the next lesson.